Subscribe to Iron Age Instincts now, because what you're about to hear isn't recycled trivia or surface-level war history. This is one of those rare subjects where engineering, survival psychology and state power collide. During World War II, a shelter was developed that worked so well at keeping people alive under bombardment that governments later decided civilians should never have access to it again. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. If you're serious about history, preparedness, and how extreme environments shape design, stay with me, because this is one of those stories that reframes what civil defense really means. During the height of the bombing campaigns, survival wasn't about comfort or optimism. It was about physics, airflow, pressure waves, and the brutal math of explosives. Cities across Europe were being flattened, and governments were desperate for structures that could withstand sustained aerial assault. Most shelters failed in predictable ways. They collapsed, suffocated occupants, or turned into fire traps. One design, however, didn't just resist bombs, it absorbed them. And that's where the story begins. The German Hochbunker was engineered to survive direct hits, not near misses. The shelter in question was the German Hochbunker, a massive above-ground reinforced concrete air raid bunker built primarily between 1940 and 1944. Unlike basements or shallow underground shelters, Hochbunkers were designed to take direct bomb strikes. Walls were commonly over 2 meters thick, poured as single continuous concrete masses with steel reinforcement so dense it bordered on absurd by modern civilian standards. Roof slabs were angled or layered to deflect blast energy rather than absorb it straight on. What made these shelters extraordinary wasn't just their thickness, but their structural logic. They were designed as monolithic forms, meaning the entire structure behaved as one piece during an explosion. Shockwaves travelled through the bunker instead of tearing it apart. In practice, this meant bombs detonated on or near the bunker would expend energy externally, leaving the interior intact. Entire city blocks could be destroyed while the Hochbunker remained standing, often with people inside emerging unharmed. The interior systems were designed for prolonged entrapment, not quick sheltering. Most civilian shelters assume short exposure. The Hochbunker assumed worst-case scenarios. Interior layouts included air filtration systems capable of removing smoke, dust, and chemical contaminants. Manual air pumps were standard, allowing ventilation even if power failed. Stairwells were offset and zigzagged to prevent blast waves from travelling inward. Doors were steel, sealed, and pressure-rated. This mattered because, well, one of the biggest killers in air raids wasn't actually collapse, it was suffocation and, firestorm oxygen depletion. Hochbunkers were built to remain habitable for hours or even days, you know. Some had water storage, emergency latrines, and compartmentalized chambers to isolate damage. The practical lesson here is simple and honestly still applies today. Survival spaces fail when they rely on assumptions about duration. So, design for longer than you think you'll need. After the war, these shelters were deemed just too effective for civilian access. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. After World War II, Allied authorities and later on West German governments restricted civilian construction of similar structures. The reasoning wasn't purely economic, not at all. It was political and strategic. Shelters like the Hochbunker, well, they undermined deterrence. If civilians could reliably survive aerial bombardment or even nuclear blast overpressure, the psychological and strategic impact of such weapons really diminished. So, in the early days of the Cold War, civil defense doctrine, well, it shifted a bit, moving toward evacuation and what you might call symbolic shelters rather than true blast-resistant architecture. Many of those Hochbunkers were sealed up, repurposed, or even partially demolished. Some of them, though, ended up as storage facilities, data centers, or even art spaces, simply because, honestly, destroying them was just too impractical. That alone really should tell you just how overbuilt they were. Now, the interesting thing is, the design principles from those days are still, totally applicable for modern survivalists. You don't actually need meters of concrete to put these lessons into practice. The first principle really is mass and continuity. A shelter should act as one unified structure, not a collection of weak joints. Even small-scale shelters, you see, benefit from continuous reinforcement and, rounded or angled surfaces to reduce stress concentration. Now, the second principle is airflow independence. Any shelter you design or retrofit, it really should function without grid power. Manual ventilation, passive airflow shafts, and filtration, these things matter more than electronics, honestly. Sometimes a simple hand-crank blower and layered filters can mean the difference between survival and panic. The third principle is blast path management. Straight corridors, doorways and vents are vulnerabilities. Offset entrances, dogleg corridors and sacrificial outer chambers dissipate energy before it reaches living space. These ideas translate directly to storm shelters, wildfire refuges, and even riot-safe rooms. Why governments still avoid telling this story honestly? The Hochbunker represents a truth states are uncomfortable with. Civilians can be protected if survival is prioritized over cost, optics, and deterrence theory. True protection reduces fear, and fear has always been a lever of control during war. That's why this shelter quietly disappeared from public discussion, despite standing intact in dozens of cities today. For historians, it's a reminder that what gets built reflects political intent as much as technological capability. For survivalists, it's proof that resilience is achievable with the right priorities. For everyone else, it's a warning about how quickly effective solutions can be buried when they challenge strategic narratives. If this kind of deep, practical history matters to you, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts, share this with someone who still thinks shelters are symbolic gestures, and keep digging. The past has far more to teach us about survival than most people are comfortable admitting.